All right, everyone, it's 7 o'clock, so we're gonna get started very soon. My name is Brittany Hartzell. I'm watershed specialist for the Columbia County Conservation District, and we've been hosting a whole series of webinars here with Mary Jo. Mary Jo Gibson, she's a master gardener for Columbia County, and she's been so gracious to do so many of these webinars for us. Today, we're gonna talk about Tree of Heaven, which is a nuisance plant in the area. I'm sure you've seen it, even if you may not have recognized it. It is all over the place. And it's also a favorite of the spotted lanternfly, which in 2 weeks, Mary Jo will be back with us here Wednesday at 7 o'clock, same time, to talk about the spotted lanternfly. But today we will be talking about the identification and control of Tree of Heaven. And with that, Mary Jo, you can take it away.
Thanks. Welcome to a program by Penn State Extension. As Brittany said, I am Mary Jo Gibson. I've been a master gardener based in Columbia County since 2003. Today we'll be going over the characteristics of how to identify Tree of Heaven and how to distinguish it from some other common native lookalikes. I'll also describe how to control Tree of Heaven, which is a task unto itself, and how to use Tree of Heaven as a way to control spotted lanternfly. And Tree of Heaven is one of those preferred hosts of spotted lanternfly. Earlier today, I was going up Interstate 81 to the Wilkes-Barre area, and all along the road is exactly what I was seeing right here in that photo. The female trees, and we'll talk about males and females in a few moments, the female trees have plenty of seed clusters. Some of them were a little chartreusey green on the yellow side. Others were turning tan with that neat little red blush. They're actually kind of neat looking plants. Okay, let's see if we can do this. All right, yeah, it's actually a very pretty tree. And before we get started, I really have to recognize David Jackson. He's a Penn State Forestry Extension educator. I met him, by now it might be 3 years ago, at a program about controlling vegetation, invasive vegetation. And I took a deep breath and pulled out my flash drive and said, would you share your PowerPoint with me? And I introduced myself, and he was really great about sharing the PowerPoint he was using. So many of these slides are his. Brittany has, or will have very, very soon, posted a resources sheet on Columbia County Conservation District's website. What I'm going to go over today really is just the beginning. It's just the tip of the iceberg. But Penn Extension has lots and lots of information available for you. So I've pretty much divided the presentation into 4 parts: identification, lookalikes, controls, and something kind of cool called trap trees. Now, there's a book that was written back in the early 1940s called A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. And I thought this was really cool. The epigraph of the book says, there's a tree that grows in Brooklyn. Some people call it the tree of heaven. No matter where its seed falls, it makes a tree which struggles to reach the sky. It grows in boarded up lots and out of neglected rubbish heaps. It grows up and out of cellar gratings. It is the only tree that grows out of cement. It grows lushly, survives without sun, water, and seemingly without earth. It would be considered beautiful, except that there are too many of it. Yeah, and that's a really wonderful description of Tree of Heaven, which I'm probably going to call Ailanthus throughout the presentation. The scientific name of Tree of Heaven is Ailanthus altissima. Okay, this tree is native to China. It was brought here in the late 1700s, so it's been around for more than 200 years. It was purposely introduced to the Philadelphia area by an amateur gardener. Absolutely valued as a street and a shade tree because it absolutely tolerated urban environments. And for plants, urban environments can be pretty darn harsh. It got established really easily. It grew like crazy, and it had basically no pests. It was widely planted, even throughout the Baltimore and Washington, D.C. areas, even up to and through the 20th century. However, as we started learning more about this tree, we started losing our enthusiasm for it. First of all, it stinks. It can sit there and mind its own business. But if there's the tiniest bit of damage, even from a good bit of wind, and the young branches and the leaves are bruised a little bit, it smells awful. We'll talk more about that. And boy, does this thing sucker. It just sends up lots and lots of shoots from its roots. And well, yeah, it's no longer a favored plant. It is, however, really, really widely distributed. All those green patches on the map represent areas where tree of heaven has been naturalized. It officially occurs in 42 states, Maine to Florida and west to California. Something that I want you to realize is this area up in here where there isn't too much tree of heaven, there isn't too many trees to begin with, okay? Those are the Great Plains. Okay. On the West Coast, okay, it was widely introduced by Chinese immigrants who, like all immigrants, wanted to have something from home. Okay, let's start with identification. What does this look like? Well, they easily go 80 to 100 them that big. In a section of well, former PPL Riverlands, just a bit upriver from Berwick. There was an area along the river where there used to be a lot of cottages, and there is an entire grove of tree of heaven. And you can look around and find the original great big one. In a relatively short period of time, they can get to be 6 feet in diameter. However, they tend to be relatively short-lived. Are there some old ones out there? Absolutely. But pretty much they're mostly less than 50 years old. They very, very rarely get to be over 100 years old. And you say, well, gee, that's really old for a tree. No, it's not. We have a good number of oaks around here that are that old and older. Now, this is where you need to start paying attention, because there are lookalikes that are good guys. Tree of heaven has what are called pinnately compound leaves, and each leaf is at least a foot and easily can be 4 feet long. This right here on the bottom left is one leaf. Okay, these little guys here are leaflets, and there are technically 41 of them here because you count this little bitty terminal leaflet here, but this is one leaf, and the end where it hooks onto the branch, that's where you can identify where a branch is, where a leaf hooks onto the branch. That is really, really big, and it's tough. And if I was paying attention to what I was doing and not having my car on autopilot, I would have gone about 1.5 miles down the road from my home, where I pretty much accidentally found a row of tree of heavens growing. If I go down the road in the other direction, about 2 miles from home, there's a huge one in somebody's front yard. Okay, so right here along the bottom, that's a yardstick. Okay, so these leaves are really big. Okay, now please look at the leaflets. The edge of each leaflet is called the margin, and the margins of tree of heaven leaflets are smooth. They have 1 or 2 little teeth at the base of the leaflet. I don't know when, it was probably as a child, I started calling these ears, okay? And I think that's not a bad name for them because you really shouldn't say that the leaflets are toothed because the margins really are smooth. Okay, the leaves, the branches, the twigs, the bark, the seeds, all parts of this plant stink when they're crushed. It's been described as cat urine. I don't think it smells like cat urine. I think cat urine smells good compared to this stuff. Burnt peanut butter is another way it's been described. I'd say more like rancid peanut butter. It is nasty. Another common name for this plant is stinking sumac. I don't like to use that expression, that common name, because this isn't a sumac at all. Okay, the bark is smooth and pale gray, a little bit on the beige side. It's smooth and greenish when it's young, but it matures to a light brown or gray. And to me, it looks like the skin of a cantaloupe. Okay. Later, it becomes a little bit rougher and a little bit darker in color. And it just happens that I don't enjoy the scent of cantaloupe either. But I'd much rather smell cantaloupe than smell this icky ailanthus. Okay. When you're identifying branches or identifying trees, you look at how the leaves are arranged on a branch, how the branches are arranged on a limb. And this tree is alternate. Some trees are opposite. This is alternate. The leaves come off on either side. There is a huge scar. I mean, it's really big. And that's somebody's thumbnail in the middle picture next to the heart-shaped or V-shaped leaf scar. And boy, is that a big leaf scar. And boy, does it hold that leaf on really well. As I was coming home from Wilkes-Barre today, I was thinking, I should have brought my pruners because to just rip that off is really kind of tough. If you split a branch, the inside of the branch is brown and very soft. It's spongy. Okay. Okay, I mentioned a little bit ago that there are male and female trees. Yes, male and female trees. The females both get flowers that are of no interest, no consequence. They're not even remotely showy. They're just these little light green things, and you're not likely to notice them. The female trees get the seed clusters. These are papery seeds called samaras. You are probably familiar with two other plants that have samara type seeds. One are the ash trees, which unfortunately we have few of around here. But the helicopters, the seeds from maples, are also samaras. These samaras that have the papery wings on them have very, very differently. And the seeds actually remain on the female trees all winter. My college roommate had a very disparaging name that she gave to these trees. She thought it looked like somebody had cleaned out a barn and flung the bedding and the manure up in the trees. And that actually is a pretty good way of describing how the seeds look in the wintertime. Now, there are tens of thousands, actually something like 50 to 60,000 seeds produced by a single female tree each year. And boy, can they spin. Boy, can they fly. I keep finding little tree of heaven seedlings where I work, and I've done some exploring, and the nearest tree of heaven is probably a good 500 feet away. Now, these guys spread by producing hundreds of thousands of seeds, but they also spread through vegetative sprouting. So lots and lots of seeds annually. A single tree that lives, a female tree that lives 40 years is capable of producing perhaps 10 million seeds. Okay, that's a lot. And they're wind dispersed. And boy, it says that they're documented for traveling distances up to 300 feet. I've gone looking for tree of heaven near where I work, and the one that I've found is at least 500 feet away. Okay. Now, this tree will also spread by sending up sprouts from its roots as far as 50 feet away from the parent tree. Okay. And if you cut or injure an ailanthus tree, it's going to go in survival mode, preservation mode, and it's going to send up dozens of root suckers and sprouts. And so it's going to end up making a very, very dense clonal colony. And we call it a clone because they are all identical, because they all came from the same original tree. If you go south on Route 11, as you are approaching Bloomsburg, there are some businesses on the right side. I'm trying to remember if it's a pool place, but there are some businesses on the right side where there were a couple ailanthus trees, or at least one, and one of the businesses cut down a huge patch of trees and weeds. I don't know why they cut them down, if they thought they were going to store something behind the building. There is a bit of a slope behind the building. And what they cut down were ailanthus, and you cut down an ailanthus, it will come back with a vengeance. And so now there's this gigantic colony of them down there. And as if making zillions of seeds and sprouting like crazy isn't enough, tree of heaven is allelopathic, which means it produces chemicals that either limit or prevent the establishment of other plants nearby. Several plants do that, and the more we study plants, the more lots of them do. The hulls on sunflower seeds are allelopathic, which is why nothing much except some grasses maybe grow underneath your bird feeder. If you've ever tried to garden anywhere near a black walnut tree, you know it doesn't work generally. Some plants are tolerant to the jewglone that black walnuts produce. Many, including tomatoes, will just drop dead. You know, they'll say and die, really, in a matter of days. Okay. As was described by A Tree Lives in Brooklyn, these guys love disturbed sites. They'll be in forest edges, fields, roadsides. They really are intolerant of shade. So where they're shaded, the seeds are not likely to do a good job of growing into another tree. So they can't compete under a closed canopy, usually, okay? They don't care if the soil is really awful, if it's poor soil, if it's rich soil, if it's sandy, if it's clay, if it's the best loam we have around. They'll tolerate rocky areas. They'll tolerate drought-prone areas. They'll even tolerate wet areas, but they prefer not wetter areas, okay? Now, if a forest area let's say, has been defoliated by like gypsy moth caterpillars, tree of heaven is going to take advantage of that. The seeds that have a pretty good lifespan, and they'll sit there and suddenly they'll get enough light and poof, they suddenly have over trees, okay? Okay, let's have a lesson in the lookalikes. Okay. Now, sumacs, staghorn sumac, smooth sumac are both very common around here. We also have dwarf sumac. You are not likely to find any poison sumac. Yes, there is a poison sumac. I had the misfortune of meeting it. By now, it was at least 20 years ago. I really thought that's what it was. And I asked somebody who should have known, and he just gave me a lecture instead. And it turned out I was right. He was wrong. And I had a really good case of poison sumac. Generally, poison sumac grows in very inhospitable habitats where nobody in their right mind would go. But you will find staghorn sumac around here, and it's perfectly harmless. It does tend to take over, but it has nice red clusters of berries on it, nice fuzzy clusters that actually make a really good lemonade type beverage. We also have lots of black walnuts around here. My former pasture is packed with them thanks to the squirrels. And the first cousin of black walnuts is a butternut. Okay, these all have long pinnately compound leaves. Now, also, so do hickories, so do ashes, so do box elders, which are cousins of maples. These also have pinnately compound leaves, but they're really shaped very differently. They have only 5 to 7 or maybe 9 leaflets, and usually the 3 most terminal leaflets are pretty big, and the ones toward the stem are pretty small. So we're not even going to talk about those. But let's talk about staghorn sumac. These leaves are maybe 16 to 24 inches long. They have toothed margins. Okay, it really is a serrated edge on those leaflets. The fruits are red and fuzzy. They have the kind of fruits that they have are called drupes, and they're persistent. They stay upright all throughout the winter. Excuse me. And these are initially throughout the winter, these are foods for the birds because there are all kinds of little buggies between the seeds in the seed clusters. Later on, when the birds are less fussy about the fruits that they eat, they will actually eat the seeds. Okay. The twigs on staghorn sumac are fuzzy. That's kind of how it got its name, like deer antlers are in velvet. The bark is smooth, and you can see lenticels. Lenticels are little pores in the bark. Okay. And staghorn sumac also, as I said, makes colonies. Okay. I have a row of forsythia right outside my window, and the birds have managed to plant a staghorn sumac in there. And one of these days when I have a helper on site, I'll have him crawl on his belly and crawl under there and take care of it for me. They can grow in my backyard. They just can't grow in my row of forsythia. Black walnuts, okay? Also very long pinnately compound leaves. They have a toothed margin, okay? And the fruits are walnuts, okay? They're big and round, and they're a nut, okay? And one of the ways to tell the difference between a black walnut and a butternut is that usually on black walnuts, the terminal leaflet is missing, okay? It's usually present on butternuts. But again, this is another neat way to tell the difference from tree of heaven, because tree of heavens always have a terminal leaflet. Okay. Now, if you look at the leaf scars on a black walnut, it's been described as a monkey face. Okay. It has 2 spots on it, so they look like eyes. We can call them monkey faces. And if you split open the bark, they have chambered pith, not just long and spongy, but it's chambered. And the bark is really, really deeply furrowed, and it's kind of like a diamond pattern. Now let's go have a review for tree of heaven. Pinnately compound leaves, just like the sumacs and the walnuts and their friends. But they have the little ears at the base of the leaflets. Okay. And the smell is positively distinctive. I will call it rancid peanut butter. It's nasty stuff. All right. So Are we seeing tree of heaven? Okay, look at the bark, look at the fruits, look at the leaflets. Do you see a smooth margin? Well, if it's hard for you to see, depending on your device, I'll tell you that those edges have evenly serrated edges. Okay. The fruits are nuts and the bark is very rough. So no, it's not tree of heaven. That's our friend, the black walnut. Unless you're a gardener, then it might not be your friend. Is this tree of heaven? Okay, the stems are fuzzy. The flower spike, which will become red and fuzzy, is tightly clustered. And the leaflets are narrow and serrated. Nope, that's our local friend, the staghorn sumac. And again, it is not poisonous. Is this tree of heaven? Okay, look at the bark. Look at the great big U or V-shaped leaf scar. The stem is fuzzy, great big attachments where the leaves hook onto the branches. And look at those leaflets. Look at the little ears. Ding, 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 ding. Yes, this is a tree of heaven. This is what we're talking about. And yes, I spent a lot of time talking about this tree and teaching you how to identify it. But these other trees are natives. They have their place in the world, and we need to tell them apart. Okay, so how are we going to manage this tree that reproduces like crazy? Okay. Why should we control it? Let's start with that idea. Biodiversity is our friend. Okay. Differences are really good. And these will also just take over and make a huge area that has no biodiversity at all. There are very few, if only one real pest of it. So it's not going to be good in the whole food chain. And the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture has figured out how to use tree of heaven to manage the spotted lanternfly populations. And I'm really not going to be talking about spotted lanternflies tonight. Now, I don't care who you are, if you have hatchets or axes or chainsaws, you absolutely cannot kill tree of heaven without treating it with an herbicide before you remove it. Okay. This is a tough plant to manage. There are some people who actually are allergic to the pollen of tree of heaven. It does produce pollen. There isn't a whole lot of pollinators that visit it. Again, it's an invasive plant. It's exotic. Exotic is the most important word there. But there are some people who are actually sensitive to the pollen from tree of heaven. And if you're working on trying to eliminate this tree, I do encourage you to wear gloves, protective clothing, because the sap can cause an irritation to some people. Not many, but some. And it's better to be safe than sorry. Extension has a really good booklet. It's a free download and it's on the resource sheet. Okay. I'll tell you all about it. Now, when should you control tree of heaven? Right now, starting in July, starting in mid to July. So through the end of July, all of August into September, and pretty much that's it. Okay. A little bit of October maybe is the only time to manage tree of heaven. So how are you going to do this? Well, first of all, please remember that you're out to manage tree of heaven. And as you're looking at the trees right now, you can easily identify male from female trees. Okay. The female trees are going to have clusters of seeds. And the bark is going to look like cantaloupe skin. Okay. And again, I'm telling you, you have to use an herbicide to manage this tree. Now, are there biocontrols? Yes, there is, except all it does is nibble. This is a really pretty little moth. The part that nibbles on the tree is, of course, the caterpillar. The moth right there in the photo is nectaring on a milkweed, but the caterpillar feeds on the leaves, but it only nibbles. And this happens to be, interestingly, a native moth. It is a tropical native, and it discovered Ailanthus down in Florida, and it has followed it up to the East Coast. Okay. And it basically is following Ailanthus all over. But this is a native moth. And isn't it a pretty little thing? It keeps its wings folded up. So there is a biocontrol, but it's not a good one. Okay. And again, this is an exotic plant, so it doesn't have that many enemies here in North America. However, this is the exciting thing. Somewhere along the line, the researchers are working very, very hard with this right now. There is a naturally occurring biofungicide. It's a verticillium wilt. It was discovered almost 10 years ago, and there's a lot of research going on right now of how this fungal, I'll call it a disease, is transmitted and what its hosts are. Now, there are many, many different kinds of verticillium wilts. If you pay attention to the tags on your tomato transplants or the seed packets, they'll often have a V on there, and that's for verticillium because there's one that affects tomatoes and their friends. There's a verticillium wilt that affects maple trees. Okay. But this particular verticillium wilt that affects tree of heaven actually does affect some other plants too. And so we have to figure out how we can use this to work on tree of heaven, but not some of the desirable crops. Okay. This was discovered here in Pennsylvania, and research has also found it in Virginia and Ohio. We think that it's spread by ambrosia beetles. Ambrosia beetles are another exotic. We're thinking perhaps an injection might work, which would be pretty labor intensive. But if it is going to manage tree of heaven, then that's a good thing. Okay. And they're doing all kinds of research on it. And the question is, has Ailanthus finally met its match? And that's a good possibility. But we, again, have to figure out how to infect the tree of heaven with it and not get it on others. Okay. Can you get out there and mow it and pull it? Yes, you can. I have pulled out Ailanthus seedlings, and boy, it takes a good bit of work to pull them out, even if they're only maybe 6 or 7 inches high. They have a really established root system there. And if you think you're pulling out little ones and there's a lot of seedlings there, they're probably coming from a root, not a seed. And they're not going to do a good job of coming up at all. Well, why don't we just keep mowing them? Yes, that will work. But you're going to have to mow it almost as often as you mow your lawn. Okay. Because they're going to keep coming up and keep coming up and keep coming up. And if the parent tree is nearby, then you really need to manage that also, because otherwise it's just going to keep nourishing the roots that are nourishing these little guys that really aren't seedlings, they're root sprouts. Now, if you just cut down the tree, the stump is going to sprout. And you're also going to get root sprouts from the very extensive root system. So simple mechanical methods aren't going to work well unless you're genuinely dealing with a seedling. Now, one really good way of managing invasive, exotic, woody plants is called the cut stump method, where you cut down the plant and within a 15-minute window, and that's really the only amount of time you have. There are some researchers say 30 minutes, a few say 20 minutes. Everybody says 15 minutes. You can cover the surface, at least the perimeter where that cambium is, the living part of a tree, with a concentrated, not ready to use or ready to spray, but a concentrated herbicide solution. Glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup, the concentrate is usually 40-something%. Ready to use glyphosate is 2%. Okay, so we're talking, this is really a concentrate. You can also use a chemical that works only on broadleafed plants. It doesn't work on grasses and their friends. So for broadleaf is triclopyr. Again, its concentrate form is usually 40-something, maybe a low 50-something%. You can also use that for cut stump. However, it doesn't work on ailanthus. It'll work on just about any other plant you're working with, but it doesn't work on ailanthus. And yes, that stump won't sprout, but the roots will, like crazy mad. So what are you going to use? And on the resources sheet, I have lots of information. Most of it's from David Jackson, who goes into detail on exactly how to use this. Okay. When we're talking about an herbicide, absolutely use one that is effective at controlling the target species. Okay. Last evening, I got a text from a friend who said, "What is this?" And it was a common ordinary garden weed that I spent my childhood pulling up. And it had gotten in with the soybeans that were Roundup Ready soybeans, and the Roundup didn't kill it. Well, yep, that's another one of those weeds that's becoming resistant to glyphosate. So you need to pick an herbicide that is the most effective at controlling the target. And today we're talking about Tree of Heaven. The other thing I want you to remember, and I'm going to say this several times, PPE, personal protective equipment. It's absolutely essential. It was essential to get us through the pandemic, and it's going to be essential to get us through the rest of the pandemic. And it is important that you protect yourself from these chemicals. Long gloves, goggles, face shield is, and we'll talk about why you're going to need a face shield, and boots. Okay, this is the important part, especially with Tree of Heaven. Apply the herbicide at the right time of the year, the optimum time of the year, which for Tree of Heaven is right now, and at the lowest rate that provides the level of control. If you put it on at the wrong time of the year, it won't do any good. You're wasting your money and you're putting chemical all in the environment when you don't need to, because it's not working. And more is not better when it comes to pesticides. The right amount really is the right amount. When it comes to plants, especially, and having a pesticide move through the plant, if it is the wrong concentration, it can damage the plant tissue instead of translocating. Okay. Always, 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 the label is the law. Follow the prescribed application methods that are on the label. Absolutely adhere to all label precautions and be patient. The results might not show up until the following growing season. Okay, we're talking trees here. Okay. We tend to be a very impatient creature, and the people who make a lot of weed killers have often put in an added ingredient so that within 20 minutes or an hour, the plant twists up and looks sick. Is that killing the plant? Actually, it's not. It might even be interfering with the chemical translocating. But oh, it's working. Instead of being patient for a week to 10 days for that chemical to move through the leaf, down the stem, and kill the roots, and then when the roots are dead, it takes a moment before the top dies, you know? Yeah, we're impatient. So be patient. Now, when are we going to do this? Well, in April, the buds are going to start breaking on Tree of Heaven. In late May through, let's say now, okay, toward the end of July, the flowers and the seeds, it's going to flower, the seeds are going to ripen. Okay. Right now, through August, through September, and just a little bit of October, is the time to apply a foliar, which would be a leaf, or a stem treatment. Okay, now, it takes time for that chemical to work. So you don't cut it down, you don't cut down the tree until well after the treatment. Let's say in the winter. Actually waiting until spring is an even better idea. One more time, be patient. The right product at the right time, be patient. Now, let's think about this for a moment. In late summer and fall, the sugary sap that the tree has been producing all year is flowing down to the roots to nourish those roots and have the reserve in the roots to make it through the winter, so it will go back up the tree when spring comes. Okay, timing is important. No, timing is essential. If the sap is flowing upward, it's really hard for a chemical to go downward. So if the sap's flowing up in March or April or May, you're fighting a losing battle. Okay. But if you wait until the sap's mostly flowing downward, it's going to work better. Okay. So you can get out there and you can treat it in the spring and you'll have dead tops. But guess what? It's going to come back with a vengeance from the roots. Okay. Root suckers like crazy. Okay. Vigorous is the word that's always used. Vigorous sprouting when the stems are killed or removed, but the root system remains intact. Okay. Here we go with the cut stump treatment. Okay. And if you're ever doing any woody plant managing, if you usually you end up using a concentrate, and usually the concentrates don't have a dye marker in it, you can purchase very reasonable price dye. It's often called Mark It, and it's a blue dye, and then you can see exactly what stumps you have and haven't sprayed. And again, it's a quick turnaround, 15 minutes. So ideally, this is a two-person operation. One person's going to do the cutting, the other person is going to do the treatment. But we're talking about Tree of Heaven today. This is absolutely positively ineffective. Yes, you got the tree out of there, but the roots are alive and well, and they will send up suckers like crazy. It's much, much better to treat the tree with another method and then cut it a month or more later. So what can you use? Now, this picture is hay-scented ferns. Okay, I know the difference, but this is the picture I was able to get of the application of foliar application, and they were using a combination of ready to spray, glyphosate, and triclopyr. Okay, we got to go for the big guns here. We're talking tree of heaven, even though this picture doesn't have tree of heaven in it. And the idea is that you want these plants to be no higher than your waist, because otherwise you have to do a lot of spraying up, and that's dangerous. It's dangerous for you. Okay. Basil bark. This works really, really well. You can add some oil to triclopyr. It's actually called bark oil. It's a very selective technique. It doesn't affect the nearby plants because you're going to be spraying the trees, and this works on small trees up to about 6 inches in diameter, and you're spraying at least a foot up the trunk. So you're not just spraying all willy-nilly and it's touching whatever. You are targeting specific trees. Okay, oil-based triclopyr. What works really well on bigger trees, it works on little trees too, but it works on the bigger trees, is called hack and squirt. Okay, you use usually half strength concentrated glyphosate or triclopyr. Either one will work. So if you have reservations about using glyphosate, use triclopyr. And for each inch diameter of the trunk, you make 1 frill. Don't girdle the tree. Girdling the tree is when you cut all the bark off all the way around. Like you might do accidentally on a young tree with a weed whacker. Okay, you've actually nicked the bark all the way around. That's going to kill the top of the tree, but it's not going to get the herbicide moving down to kill the roots. So some people actually use a hatchet that has been modified. So the tip of the hatchet might be 1 inch or 2 inches wide. Okay, it's a narrow thing. They've taken away part of the blade and they just go whack, whack, hack, and then immediately squirt glyphosate or triclopyr into the hacks. And because you haven't girdled the tree, you haven't damaged the bark all the way around the tree, it's going to work. It will translocate down and kill the roots. Again, using a marker dye is really good because then you know that you got them, because you're going to be moving right along with this. You could have, get your friends and go out there and attack the whole colony. Some will be hackers, some will be squirters, and it works. Okay, so what's a trap tree? Okay. There is an entire webinar. It's a recorded webinar. It's about an hour long, unless this one's an hour and a half long, sorry, about using tree of heaven as a trap tree. What I'm going to tell you is the basics, okay? This does not go into detail. The resource sheet that Brittany has posted for us has lots and lots and lots of resources, all free, from Penn State's website. And information is there. I even included some links to roadside vegetation management, just so you can see really the big picture. Again, the person who has really done this is Art Glover, and especially Dave Jackson. Okay, so what is a trap tree? What does it have to do with ailanthus, and what does it have to do with spotted lanternflies? Now, this is where I ask you to pay really close attention to what I'm saying. And if I hesitate, it's because I want to make sure I am saying the right word. Pesticides. Pesticide is an extraordinarily broad term. Pesticides include mouse poisons. Pesticides include Something to manage blight on tomatoes. Pesticides include weed killers for your lawn. Pesticides include bug sprays. Okay. Pesticide is a very, very broad term. When we talk about trap trees, we're going to be talking about two different terms. We're going to be talking about herbicides. Herbicides kill plants. And so we're talking about tree of heaven. So we're talking about herbicides that kill tree of heaven. We're also going to talk about insecticides that kill insects. And in this case, the insecticide is going to kill spotted lanternfly. Okay, so pay attention. And if you're unsure, the resources are on the resource sheet. Okay. Now, first go out and find a batch of tree of heaven. It's not usually just one, but find the tree of heaven, absolutely identify it as tree of heaven and not one of our good lookalikes, and kill most of the tree of heaven with an herbicide, okay, like hack and squirt, basil bark, foliar, okay? But since we're talking decent sized trees, probably we're talking hack and squirt or basil bark sprays, okay? If you can, because they're going to probably be decently sized, so you should be able to identify which are the female trees and go out and reconnaissance now. Now's the perfect time to do it. It's a little trickier in like early spring or late spring and early summer, but look for those seed clusters, okay? You want to kill the most of the tree of heavens, but for sure the female trees with an herbicide. Okay. So now's the time to plan ahead. Now's the time to do it. Okay. You don't have to remove the dead trees unless they're going to be a hazard in a storm or something. Okay. You can just let them stand there. I would encourage you to mark, maybe with spray paint, the trees that you purposely have not killed. And again, you want to save the boys. Why are you saving the boys and killing the girls? Because the girls make hundreds of thousands of seeds. Okay. So now you have a grove of tree of heaven. You have one or two live trees. Now, are the dead trees still there? Sure they are. But the spotted lanternflies are sap feeders. They're only going to feed on live trees. So you've now reduced the number of trees that they're going to feed on. And now comes the sneaky part. You apply a systemic insecticide to the living trees. You used an herbicide to kill most of the trees. The ones that remain alive, you didn't treat with herbicide. Now you're going to treat them with a systemic insecticide. That means this insecticide, you can spray on the bark, you could inject it, you could use it as a soil drench, but it is going to be absorbed through the tree and go all throughout the whole tree, out to all the branches and out to all the leaves. Okay. So now the spotted lanternflies are going to feed on insecticide treated tree of heaven, and they're going to die dead. And yes, this really does work. It is one way to manage spotted lanternfly populations, but to do it, you have to manage the ailanthus population. Okay. Now, in 2 weeks, I'll go over more information about spotted lanternfly and their management, but I do have that link on the resource sheet for you. And there even is a video there, a webinar about using tree of heaven as a trap tree. Okay, and the insecticide that you would use is dinoterfuron or imidacloprid. Okay, I don't speak with brand names because I shouldn't promote one brand over another. Dinoterfuron is more water soluble, it moves faster, and it has a shorter life. Imidacloprid moves more slowly, but has a longer life within the tree. Okay, we talked about what tree of heaven looks like. We talked about what its lookalikes are and how to tell them apart. We talked about management, which is really you have to use an herbicide and it has to be at the right time of the year, which is now. And we talked about using some as trap trees for spotted lanternflies. Now, extension.psu.edu, that will take you right to Extension's website, and you can just put Tree of Heaven in the search engine. If you're using it on a phone, the search bar is up on top, but on a laptop or some kind of computer, it's in the middle. Just put in Tree of Heaven or put in Ailanthus, which is a little trickier to spell perhaps. Click on it and away you go, and you'll find articles and videos. But again, I did ask Brittany to post the resources sheet, and it's a document that you could print if you really want to, but there's no good reason to print it. Just leave it on your computer or your device and click on the links and it'll take you right to the resources. Again, they're all free. Now, at the top of Extension's website is that nice blue bar with a little pretty bug on there, and that will take you right to all the information you'd ever want for spotted lanternfly. Excuse me. Okay, wait. There's more. All right, I was all excited 2 months ago about periodical cicadas, and I actually got to meet Brood 10 in person in a couple different locations. They were wonderful creatures. They're done now. In fact, today when I was out by my compost pile, I heard the annual cicadas singing. Okay, so it's time for one kind to be gone for 17 years, but now the annuals are here. But if you'd like, the recording is still on the Conservation District's website. In 2 weeks, I'll be back talking about spotted lanternflies, the myths and management, and whatever update PennState tells me about. They give me an update about every 2 weeks. If you have any interest in becoming a master gardener or you'd like more information about it, we will have our training program starting the first week in October. It'll go all through the end of March in 2022. There are weekly webinars to watch. You'll meet monthly for hands-on activities and reviews. This year, we're holding the classes for Columbia, Montour, and Northumberland counties at the new Montour County Administration Center on Front Street in Danville. Okay. If you want more information about that, on the resource sheet is my email address. Feel free to email me. The Master Gardeners of Columbia County are hosting our annual Fall into Gardening event. When we started doing all the planning, we didn't know what would be happening with the pandemic. And if you listen to the evening news, we still don't know what's going on with the pandemic. But our annual Fall into Gardening event will be through Zoom again. And it will be Saturday, September 18th. I have a presentation on creating your own year-round backyard bird habitat. We have a person from the mushroom lab at Penn State talking about how to grow mushrooms at home. And I'll be back. Yes, indeed. I do like bugs. And I'll be talking about spotted lanternflies. We do offer an early bird discount. The 3 presentations for only $12 if you register 2 weeks or more in advance. I'm so glad you could join us this evening. I am Mary Jo Gibson, and I'm a Penn State Extension Master Gardener from Columbia County. And we got in just under an hour, Brittany. How's that for cool?
That's perfect timing.
It doesn't usually happen. Okay. So, oh, we have something in the chat. What's in the chat? Okay. We have the link. There we go. Okay, great. Okay. Any questions out there? Okay. Well, thanks for coming. I'm glad to give you some information about it. And if you know somebody who wants more information on Tree of Heaven, just encourage them to go to Columbia County Conservation District's website. The resources sheet is there, and Brittany will have this recording posted in just a day or 2 or 3. So unless there's something else, thank you very much and good night.